Welcome, Dr. Petra, to the podcast.
Thank you so much.
So you're a naturopathic doctor that's certified in functional medicine that practices Deuterinomic medicine.
Deutenomics, yes.
Deutenomic, yes.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So, great question to start with. So, Deutenomics. Deutenomics is a new field in science. It was introduced by Dr. Laszlo Boros in 2019 at the fourth the fourth Deuterium Depletion Summit in Budapest. And Deutenomics is the science of how water moves in the body. That's the easiest way to say it. So, go ahead.
Okay. So, when I grew up or in school, I heard water is just basically a medium where everything dissolves into and it doesn't really do much.
Yeah. So interesting, right?
Yeah.
So,
is that the truth?
No. Actually, in 2021, team Frankel and Finker published a paper. They are from NASA and Georgia Tech, and Water and Life. It's the medium and the message, and it's actually a fascinating paper because it talks about really how important water is and how it is the cornerstone of all biological processes, and that there is no place to ever call water an inert agent or substance. So, in fact, in a third to half of all reactions, water is either produced or used. It's really very, very. It's the most frequent and dominant agent in all of biology and life. So, in most cases, it's the substrate, so the starting substance. It's the intermediate. It's the cofactor, and it's the product. So water is everywhere, and it's always involved. And unfortunately, if you open up the biochemistry books, you will see that in many reactions, water is simply assumed to be there. It's not even listed. It's not even discussed, even though it clearly plays a major role. And so a lot of these textbooks, the textbooks has to be rewritten, and all of this data and these processes have to be deuter-imitated, so newly interpreted, so deuterpreted, and from this new foundational way, because deuterium is, in fact, extremely important and foundational to human health. And so let's talk about what that is.
Yes.
So
please.
You probably also learned that water is H2O, two hydrogen atoms and an oxygen. And there is a natural occurring different form of this hydrogen atom, which we call an isotope. And this isotope is called deuterium. It's twice the weight, because it has a neutron, doubling its weight, and it occupies twice the space of a hydrogen. So, as I just explained, how extremely important water is in all reactions, is if all of a sudden, you're moving something that has now a basketball instead of a tennis ball on it, everything changes, right? So, not just that, but it's also what we call the kinetic isotope effect. So that means the way this atom interacts with other atoms. So it binds much stronger. So hydrogen bonding is a very well-known concept that we discussed. But all of a sudden, if there's deuterium, the bonding strength is much greater. So that affects how enzymes or molecules or proteins or anything is broken down if there is a deuterium atom that has replaced a hydrogen. So it's fundamental in understanding and reassessing all of this data, and it's for human health. It's very important.
I heard you talk about the mitochondria.
Yes.
So those two are related, right? How deuterium and the mitochondria interact, let's say. but just so everybody who's listening can follow, like, what is the mitochondria? What is it important for? What happens if it's not healthy? Yeah, let's start here.
Okay. So mitochondria are these little, cell organelles that are in the cytoplasm. And, oftentimes when we look at pictures of it, they'll show like 5 of them, maybe 7 of them. But in actuality, 25 to 40% of the cytoplasm is taken up by these little organelles. Now, these organelles are extremely dynamic and they change. And they have influences on signaling, and they produce 3 things that are extremely important. The first one is heat. The second one is metabolic deuterium depleted water. And the third one is ATP. These are the main functions of mitochondria in our body. So
does that mean somebody who has always cold feet or like just low body temperature has mitochondrial dysfunction, or they're kind of weak?
Well, they have a lack of blood flow in their tissues, and that could be for a variety of reasons.
Okay.
But yes, it may be. I mean, the reality is if mitochondria start having problem functioning due to excess levels of deuterium, then this has major consequences for all sorts of things. So, it's, as we know, 80 to 95% of all disease is due to mitochondrial dysfunction. And this is what it comes down to. It's all because of a change in the energetics of the cell, and the energetics of the cell are primarily because of.
Okay. So in the ideal scenario, how does the mitochondria create energy and ATP and all those things?
Okay. So if everything runs smoothly, the foods that we consume are broken down by certain biochemical processes. The first one would be for carbohydrates is glycolysis. Glycolysis has many different reactions, 10 steps. They are there primarily to make sure deuterium does not enter mitochondria. And then you have the TCA cycle that, again, has many different reactions. And some of those, 3 in fact, are water exchange reactions. And again, making sure that deuterium doesn't get in, that the mitochondria are able to produce deuterium depleted water for us. So the foods that we break down are basically what happens is the hydrogens that are on any food substrate, whether that's a carbohydrate, whether that's a protein, or whether that's a fatty acid, they are harvested by mitochondria for energy. So in the form of a proton. So a hydrogen, a proton gets picked up in the TCA cycle, and a proton is a hydrogen ion that is stripped off its electron and now carries a positive charge. So this, an NAD, maybe you've heard of that.
No. What's that?
An NAD is a proton carrier that presents to. It's a very important compound, and it's constantly recycles. It picks up a proton, drops it at the mitochondria at complex 1 of the electron transport chain. And so the electron gets harvested, the proton gets pushed down, and this is how the whole system flows. So if instead of this proton, of this hydrogen, it comes as a deuterium atom and it creates a deuteron, this changes the entire mechanism of how this is supposed to flow, right? So now all of a sudden it starts to slow down, and there's different complexes that the electrons have to travel through, and the protons are being tunneled through. And at the end, the protons have to come back out through these little teeny little nanomotors. And as you can imagine, so if maybe a rotating door at a department store, right? If people run through, the door keeps flowing. But if you all of a sudden get someone with a giant box or someone twice the size, boom, that doesn't go anymore. You stop. Yeah. So that's the problem with a deuteron. And so it shuts down your ATP production. Now, if this happens, you have a lot of nanomotors. So if this happens in a lot of nanomotors, because of this excess levels of deuterium, the different parts of this pathway start to back up. So the protons no longer can be recycled. So they start backing up. The NADH cannot deliver the proton, and that starts to back up. So then you also, the pyruvate, that's the product of glycolysis, can no longer keep flowing. The TCA cycle is not running efficiently anymore. It's not able to exchange the hydrogen in their specific spots. So metabolites start to increase. Citrate cannot no longer produce fatty acids that we need. Carbon dioxide starts to increase. You have changes in blood flow. Basically, what the result is an acidic environment and metabolic crowding. And this is what we call the Warburg effect.
Okay.
Heard of that?
Yes.
Okay. So that's this very simple explanation. It's very complex, and there's many processes part of it, and there are other pathways involved as well, but this is not the time to bring that up. But does it make sense to you?
Yes. So basically, there's a kind of traffic jam inside the mitochondria.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. And so what are the consequences of that on a whole body basis? Because you just talked about the more cellular.
Yeah. What we call, this is the submolecular processes. And so the dysregulation of that due to these excess levels of deuterium causes this dysfunction. And it ultimately causes all mitochondrial dysfunction and all mitochondrial disease and all metabolic disease. It's the foundation of all chronic disease that we're seeing. So it's as simple as that. This is it. And so then you can talk about the different reasons why people collect excess levels of deuterium, right? That's
right. Yes.
Part of this story, of course. You tell me if that's where you want to go next.
Yeah. Where does it come from?
Okay. So deuterium is present in all water and in all foods. It's everywhere. It's in the air we breathe. So if we consume foods that are high in deuterium and we don't live a lifestyle that facilitates the excretion of the excess levels, then we tend to start accumulating it. And depending on other factors, lifestyle factors, whether you are outside and you get natural light, or whether you are certain, you sleep poorly, you have certain medical conditions already, you bed at 3 a.m. or all of those things. So that changes how your body regulates deuterium. And so sleep is a period of time that some of my patients have presented, like, oh, I need 14 hours of sleep, otherwise I can't function. Once you start dialing down the level of deuterium coming, they can function again, you know. So this is a very dramatic impact that it can have once you become aware of it. Now, let's talk about food.
Mm-hmm.
So fats have the lowest deuterium content. So this is the key to the ketogenic diet, right? Now, I have to make a very important addition to that. The fats have to come from sources of animals or plants that were grown in their authentic habitat or environment, right? So there actually was a paper published in Metabolomics in early 2022 that took this data and looked at dairy and meat products coming from animals from either grass-fed or grain-fed animals. And the differences were significant in deuterium content.
Oh, wow.
So grass-fed butter is much lower in deuterium than a store-bought, agricultural, industrial complex type of a butter, and so forth. And we see that with meats. So that's a very crucial point to keep in mind.
How much difference are we talking about there?
Oh,
on average,
10, 15 ppm. Like it's big. Mm-hmm. So on the long run, that makes a huge difference, right? So there is that. The animal proteins, again, same story. They have to come from not just the fats, but also their meat. Ideally, they're fattier meats, so that they carry that those good hydrogens in them already. Fats are so important because basically they're just strips of hydrogens attached to a carbon backbone, and they are generally deuterium depleted. So we have no mechanisms in our body to pick off deuterium atoms from a fatty acid. They just get processed. We do for carbohydrates, right? But we don't for fatty acids. So it's crucial that those fats are high quality fats.
So, for example, if there's a person that eats a lot of processed food with canola oil, soybean oil, and it's more deuterium heavy, right? The body will just absorb it, basically.
This will cause this accumulation, this excess accumulation, because it can't get it out. So we'll get into mitochondria. That it's a huge problem.
Okay.
So that will make that whole shift happen. Yeah. So these foods are toxic for that reason. Yeah. And then, so the next step is the green and colored above ground vegetables, right? So due to the process of photosynthesis, these plants are already lower in deuterium than others. And then you're going to hit about the 150 parts per million. So we haven't really talked about the amounts, right? So
yes, please get it.
Yeah. So the concentration of deuterium in most people's drinking water, both in Europe and in the US, is approximately 150 parts per million. So that means out of 1 million hydrogens, 150 will be deuterium. Now, you might say, really? Is that all? Are we talking about that?
It's so small, right?
It's so small, yeah. So, but then if you think about, and if you measure deuterium in the bloodstream, for instance, and then compare it to other substances that we measure, like glucose, for instance. So we have 2 to 4 times more deuterium in our bloodstream than we have glucose. We have 5 times more of deuterium than we have calcium. We have maybe 12 to 18 times more, depending on how much magnesium you have, deuterium than magnesium. So I'm just wanting to show you this context. And
it's a lot, because we think about having those, blood sugar or different minerals. We think about that a lot, and it's like, it's there. We have it, so much of it in.
Yeah. So,
but it's very little compared to deuterium. Wow.
Yeah, It's very,
Wow.
yeah. So that's a significant thing. So most drinking water is about 150 parts per
Mm.
million. So that has steadily increased over, millennia. But uh, the foods, so if we're talking about foods, most fats are around 105, 110.
Oh.
Animal proteins will be around 125, 130. Then certain vegetables will be around 140. Then you hit that water, 150. Then you hit fruits, about 155. Then you go to processed foods, 60, 170. You take coconut water, 165. You go to, on and on. An espresso coffee, thingy that everyone seems to use, 170 ppm, which, yeah. So those are toxic. No one should be having those.
Hopefully you're not drinking liters of coffee a day.
Yeah, hopefully you don't. But that's made with 150 water. I'm just saying that adds it to it. It's just, it's crazy. So,
yeah.
So that's a good idea to kind of get a concept of the water. So there's and water varies. So the ocean water is about 155.8. Certain spring waters are 140 ppm. If you go to the center of continents, you will have likely lower because it's often higher. And because of these, as I mentioned, kinetic isotope effects of deuterium, water freezes at different temperature, actually at 4 degrees Celsius. So the water that is under it becomes light water, as we call it. It's lower in deuterium, which is how we describe it. And so that's why spring water coming from a mountain will be lower in deuterium levels.
Okay.
Yeah.
I heard that the air we breathe also affects our deuterium levels. So how does that work?
I mean, it's when you live into the ocean, you're obviously more exposed with water vapor from there, right?
Okay.
So that's it. But the main contributors are food and the water you drink, or any beverages. That's what ends up, really. That's what you can control,
Okay. It's just like for specificity, it does exist, but it's not like very significant.
I don't think so. No.
Okay. And so why would somebody start consuming deuterium depleted water?
Well,
and what kind of, because I know it's used for treatment, so what kind of, I don't know how to phrase it. Yeah, in what situation would you suggest consuming it, for example?
So I suggest consuming it if a client or patient presents with certain diagnosis that we need to be very fast with lowering deuterium levels in the body. Clearly, the person has to be able to afford it. There are other ways to go around lowering levels, which is with food and lifestyle. But a very effective way is drinking deuterium depleted water. So let's define what that is.
Yes.
So as I said, water can have different concentrations. Deuterium depleted water is only therapeutic when it is below a level of 105 ppm or lower. Yeah.
Okay.
We could consider a 125 ppm a wellness water. That would be a great place where you could maintain. We think that if your levels of deuterium in your body, when you measure that through saliva, if you are below 130 or 125 area, basically mitochondrial dysfunction to the extent where you have disease is not really very likely. So that's how we think of it. And then so for real treatments, the level of the concentration that you choose to use depends on the person's diagnosis, the amount of water they drink, the weight of the body weight of the person, and you can then calculate based on that what the right place to go is. And you want to keep room to drop lower in case you have to kind of facilitate that further depletion if you want. And then you can cycle it at some points to kind of, keep the body guessing and not getting steady, completely used at one level.
Is it common to cycle, or do some people just stay on it?
It depends, why you do it.
It okay.
Totally depends. So with somebody with a cancer diagnosis, you cycle. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, you cycle. And in what kind of situation would a person just stay on it?
If it's for prevention of all disease, and you want to be really proactive, if you want to perform better either in athletics or in cognitive function, people will tell me that they experience really a great clearing of the brain and that they're faster cognitively. For those reasons, you would want to do that.
And why is it recommended to cycle? So what is happening when you stop it? What's the point of that?
Cycling it, and I mean cycling it to lower levels of concentration. Yeah, so you may start at 105, and then you may go down after a period of time to 85 ppm, and then to 65 ppm, and then you may go back up again to. You see?
Okay, that's how I thought. You drink it for a while, and then you just stop the deuterium depletion water, and you just drink the normal water, and then you start again.
Yeah, no, I mean, it really depends. It depends on your finances. It depends on all of the other interventions you're able to implement. You see, it's hard for some to do all of it, so then this becomes the easy way to do it. Part of it,
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned lifestyle before. So you already talked about diet, but what other ways are there to deplete the deuterium inside your cells?
Yeah. So I think the light environment you are in is extremely important. And all of the electromagnetic frequencies that we are exposed to. I think thinking about any toxins that you are exposed to in the products that you use, in the pans that you cook with, in the items you clean with, all of those, any medical interventions that you take, drugs or whatever that is. So there's many places where we can all most likely improve upon how we go about what we do in our life and what we expose ourselves to. But I think a light piece is actually really, really crucial. And most of us are not aware of it. We're being told that the sun is toxic and, we have to wear sunglasses and sunscreen, and it's the reverse. Yeah, no, you've probably already realized that. And these are all pieces of the puzzle that's one by one need to be addressed and improved upon. And you can also start working on your body, trying to become more resilient, able to withstand cold and hot, both, increase that resiliency that you have. So those are all pieces of that.
And can you just shortly explain why those affect the deuterium?
There's certain details that are still really need to be calculated, pinpointed, rather than me hypothesizing on how I think they work. I'm going to ask you, we'll talk about that the next time when you have a clear understanding. I think, because there's so much to it already, but simply by just living in coherence with nature, you will facilitate and allow your body to function better in all respects, in oxygenation of all tissues and so forth. And that's ultimately what we what we want. Oxygen is the rate limiting factor for the production of the metabolic water in our mitochondria. So oxygenation of tissues is huge. So breathing exercises, being outside, facilitating that, being aware of all of these pieces is very, very important.
Okay. So can you explain a little bit about the geometry of the molecules that get affected through deuterium? So yeah. And how that is going to impact the functioning in either way.
So deuterium is a very unusual isotope because there's many different elements on periodic table that have isotope, right? So for instance, carbon has several, but the difference between them is very little in terms of the effect they cause. So deuterium, it's 100%, but more so, a deuterium atom has 1,000-fold effects on the other hydrogens around it and on metabolism of tunneling. So that's a huge piece of it. But let's just break it down even further. Let's look at it this way. So let's look at cholesterol, right? Cholesterol is a 27 carbon, 44 hydrogen, beautiful molecule. Just floats in the bloodstream. And if there is a deuterium atom attached to certain of the carbons, that may change a few things, because how we create vitamin D from cholesterol in the bloodstream is when the sun comes down, shines on our skin, and the hydrogen bonds, like we talked about earlier, start resonating. So they have this little, and the resonance, the power of the resonance will then break open the bond between carbons 9 and 10. And now it creates what we call a cyclosteroid, and that is vitamin D. And so if there's a deuterium atom attached to the carbon, that bond won't break, because it takes way more energy than the photon energy can provide. But anyway, if it does do that successfully, now that vitamin D can carry on down to the lower tissues and deposit this energy, this photon energy that it just took up to the deeper tissues that never get the sun. So it's a really special compound. And, a vitamin D supplementation by no means could ever match that. And in fact, a vitamin D supplementation, when you ingest it, it gets taken up by a non-specific lipoprotein to travel through the bloodstream. Whereas if you produce your vitamin D from your cholesterol, it binds to a vitamin D binding protein who knows exactly where to deliver this vitamin D to. And so it has a very different function. Okay, so that's one part. So if deuterium populates the backbone of DNA.
What's the backbone of the DNA?
So DNA, you look at the sugars, and I'm going to refer you to. So in January, I had an article published in the Council letter called "Submolecular Dysregulation is the Cause of Cancer." And to accompany that article, I reported a presentation that is on my website. So I have images there.
I can link that down below. Perfect.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, please do. And so that people can actually look at these structures, because it's way more helpful. I don't know if you're a visual learner, but it's nicer to see. So if you look at DNA, it's basically a series of its backbone of of ribose sugars, and if they have deuterium attached to it, their shape will obviously change, and this is how they will also be larger in size, and they will express differently. So this is the piece where you don't have to have mutations, or you don't have to have epigenetic changes. It could be as simple as having deuterium, excess levels of deuterium onto the backbone of a DNA structure. And when it's being replicated, it goes haywire. And this is also what causes the cell to start wanting to divide if there's too much material in that cell. That's how this takes place. Yeah, so that's another place where this can completely throw things off. Does that make sense?
Yes. It's really interesting because you hear about mutations, but you never hear about how deuterium throws off the proper shape, right?
Yeah. It's actually really very significant. And again, I have the details on my power presentation where you can see it. That the number of the chromosomes completely changes due to the excess deuterium, and that's actually the most frequent genetic problem. So yeah, it's fascinating.
It's super interesting. Okay, so you mentioned the cancer. So how does where should we start? Well, first, how does it happen? We kind of just touched on it, but maybe you can, tell us a little bit more about it specifically for cancer, how it happens, and how the deuterium and maybe how other theories, how well they work or not work in the actual prevention and curing and treatment of cancer.
Okay. So there's basically currently two paradigms of cancer, right? The one is cells just start uncontrollably proliferating and due to some sort of an injury, right? That's one. And the second one is the somatic mutation theory. And that is basically based on those mutations. Mutations cause the cancer. You will have bad luck. You had a mutation. That's it. So cells don't just start replicating out of nowhere. There is a reason. And we know what the reason is. It's this excess level of deuterium. Two, and I'll get more back on that, but two, the genetic theory, I refute that entirely in my article and also in this presentation. And I break it down, all the reasons why. And, I'll mention a few important pieces that I think are good for you to know is that, for instance, in 2012, there was a paper published that looked at 31,000 patients, and they compared the genetic mutations between the cancer patients and the controls, the healthy people. And almost all of the people that were healthy had the exact same mutations, except they didn't have cancer. So, that's, yeah, there's that. And then some very interesting data in Europe where they looked at the type of mutations in the tumor and see if they could possibly, if that could predict metastases. And it turns out that the mutations in a tumor are very different within one tumor, and they're very different in metastases. They're totally new presentations of the problem. So there's no way you can target any genetic therapy based on that variety. It makes no sense. There are over, I think I've counted 84 million mutations now cataloged in this particular database of mutations. And so clearly that's not it, right? So that's that. All the other ideas of cancer, so the evolutionary theory of cancer, for instance, this is another big one. Again, it makes no sense. Basically, they're saying, the cell goes backwards, it loses its function, it's going back times in evolution, it's trying to survive. It's not doing any of that. Mitochondria starts to dysfunction, it loses its ability to, direct the cell to produce the energy, to produce metabolic water, which is the most important piece of it. And so the cell loses function, and it may look to them like it's reversing backwards, but it's completely dysfunctional. So due to deuterium, that's the reason. You know, we have to be really clear on what the mechanisms are, because that will direct the treatment approach, right? That's why this part is so important. And this excess deuterium, we call it an oncoisotope because it gives, it acts as a growth factor for cancer, because this extra deuterium accumulates into the DNA. And as I said to you, that increases the amount of genetic material that's present. It forces the cell to proliferate, to break open and keep going. So,
are you saying it's basically there's too much pressure inside the cell?
The cell has to divide. Yeah,
because the deuterium is bigger, so the whole structure is kind of like, Oh, okay.
Yeah, it has to divide, and then that triggers it all.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's a very important point. There's many other theories out there. Glucose becomes a problem because the amount of deuterium it generally carries, right? And that's a big issue. Glutamine is not an issue, and I know certain theories out there are saying glutamine and glucose fuel the cancer. Well, glutamine doesn't, and I want to briefly tell you why. If we look at glutamine, which is the most abundant free amino acid, but it is available only in very low concentrations, maybe a fifth or less compared to glucose in the blood circulation. So that's one point. The second point is that there is no regulation of glutamine in human metabolism. So none whatsoever. So, if you compare that, for instance, with glucose, we've got insulin, we've got glucagon. There's many different regulatory processes that keep this in check. And if we need more of it, we can make it, right? But that's not the case with glutamine. So that makes it a conditionally essential amino acid, meaning that if we, for some reason need more of it, our body cannot all of a sudden replenish it and make more of it. And in terms of cancer proliferation, cellular proliferation, we can't all of a sudden make more glutamine to feed it. So because of that, it's not a substrate for cancer. It's not. So it's there are other reasons. So it's the deuterium excess that causes this entire metabolic crowding, this dysfunction that I described to you earlier, that gives rise to cancer. That's it. And so to reverse it, we have to stop excess deuterium from coming in these high amounts, and facilitate the regulation of the excess levels that we now have, and try to improve that. So, that goes down to optimizing sleep, to movement, to avoiding a lot of things that can add more to it, and so forth.
What is the research saying about the deuterium depletion in cancer? Like, how is the outcome?
So there's a lot of data, actually. There's been for 3 decades now. And the doctor from Hungary, Dr. Gábor Somlyai, has published the most. And his first book was, I think, in 2000. And he just last year published an updated version of that, and describes a lot of different cases. And he also published a lot of the papers on it. The data is very good, but as you may imagine, because this is not a financial benefit to anyone, really, certainly not the current prevailing industrial medical complex. This is not being financed. There's no drug to patent. So there is a clear lack of huge amount of data, but we have very important papers that have been published on the mechanisms and on what deuterium depleted water does if you consume it. Yeah, that's where we are at. So I have those papers on my website. In 2016, a paper was published by Dr. Laszlo Boros and his colleagues about submolecular regulation and how that affects these water exchange reactions in the TCA cycle. And that paper very clearly identified the mechanisms by which we clear these levels of deuterium. So we know the mechanism. Metabolomics research is really interesting. You are able to basically tag a certain substance that you want to follow and see how it travels through your metabolism, and then see where it ends up. And they can be really specific with targeting and labeling just certain sugars on a or certain hydrogens on any sugar, and follow that and trace it in all the different pathways. And so a lot of it has been revealed through that. And this data is very, very strong. Then there was a whole series of papers done also in 2011 and then 2014 that show this glycolytic shift that I'm talking about, that causes this trigger of moving towards this metabolic crowding, causing the Warwick metabolism, pyruvate piling up, and it can only go down the lactic acid pathway, which is what we see in cancer metabolism, right? But these papers show that this glycolytic shift is triggered by this particular enzyme, fumarate hydratase, which is one of the metabolic TCA cycle enzymes that facilitates the water reaction from fumarate. So, yeah, so from malate to fumarate. So this is very significant because the authors also showed that if you restore the depleting function, if you restore the function of this enzyme, you can reverse the process and you do not get cancer. So that's why this is a very, very significant piece. So the mechanisms are there. We understand how it works. It's been worked out. We know. So this is a very useful. And again, I explained that in my presentation because I think it is so important to understand. Now, not most of the cancer patients will have this genetic mutation. And by the way, this is where genetics does matter.
Okay.
If you have a genetic mutation in the genes that code for the mitochondrial enzymes that facilitate the TCA cycle. So if you have a problem there, then yes, you will have a problem keeping deuterium out of the matrix. So you can overcome this, and they've shown that. And these are really great papers and absolutely worth looking at. And we can check this by doing certain tests and see how you are able to clear, or how your mitochondrial or your TCA cycle runs and flows smoothly or not, and if you need to adjust that. So yeah, it's really interesting. We know the mechanisms. Now we just need funding. We need lots of funding, but that's only for people that want solutions. If you want to continue to have sick care, then yeah, that's not what we're gonna get. So
I know.
Yeah.
That's really cool that you are actually able to reverse it, because I think that's the goal, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we know it's possible, and we see it all the time. I mean, it's absolutely possible. So, yeah, it just, we have to continue to educate. We have to continue to get stronger at diagnostics, being able to test, there's many areas that we can do better on. I will start creating a course for practitioners to learn how to implement this, to learn how to assess, explain the pathways, the understanding of it all. It's huge. A lot of people just never, retained most of their biochemical information when they were in medical school, or physics, because physics is also part of this. But we need to get back to that, and need to explain and get people up to date to, create health around this. That there isn't, there's options we can work with cancer.
That's very promising.
Yeah, it is. It's very exciting.
Yes.
It keeps me going every day. Yeah.
And so if what kind of, so let's say somebody's coming to you. Yeah, what kind of people do you work with? And what kind of people is it possible for you to work with?
So I would say probably half of my patients and clientele are those who've received a cancer diagnosis. Some of them, they dealt with it, and now the big goal is to prevent recurrence. So we work on all aspects of that. I work with individuals who have metabolic issues. So that will be the traditional ones that we know of: diabetes, endocrine dysfunction, hypothyroid issues, young women with cycle problems, all of that. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a wide variety, really.
And so this is obviously going to be a very general answer again, but so how do you work with them, or what happens from there?
So a full intake, and really for me to learn who they are, what they do, what their issues are, and then depending on their ability, where they are in the world, what they can implement, we will try to start as many ways that can change how this outcome happens, and we can support that with certain, not just lifestyle, but there's the food is huge piece too, and then there's certain botanicals that can also be very useful that we know help deplete deuterium in other ways. So it's just a mixture of things, but it's extremely individual, as you said, and
Yes.
it really depends. A lot of people already come with lots of supplements that they are, then the big game becomes trying to get them off of a lot of that to kind of calm down whatever's coming in and try to regulate that. So that's really it. I consult only online, and in the US I can order all the tests that I want, which is very useful for my patients, so that we can see what's happening. Ideally, I would check organic acid tests for mitochondrial function. We would do lab tests, regular blood work that can be very helpful. There's genetic tests we can do to assess other aspects. So yeah, there's a lot we can do.
Cool. And what have been some transformations that you've seen with people over,
So, I mean, of course, the absence of recurrence, right, is a very big one. I just, one of my favorite examples that I used often is a young woman who came to me who at age 8, she was 20. She did not have her menstrual cycle for 18 months. And we ruled out all the traditional reasons why. And then the medical establishment then just says, okay, well, you have idiopathic, hypothalamic, amenorrhea. Bye-bye. And so, okay, that's not good enough, right? We need an answer. So, tested deuterium levels really quite high. Then placed her. She was drinking a lot of water, and there is this idea that's and it's being promoted still today that you have to drink lots and lots of water, hydrate, drink half your body weight in ounces a day, 8 glasses at least. And I think she was drinking, 3 to 4 liters of water a day, and that has a lot of effects. It's not only high in deuterium, but it also alters your hormones, and it actually basically shuts down antidiuretic hormone. But antidiuretic hormone governs or also controls the action of gonadotrophic releasing hormone, which is the one that produces the steroid hormone. So this excess amount of water is an issue. And so we reduced that. We did replace it with deuterium depleted water for 2 months, and changed the food, no carbs, just strictly limited the carbohydrates. And, she was in college, so that's basic. That was hard to do, but she did it. And, at the moment of testing, estrogen was less than 5, basically. And at 1 month, it was 40. And at the second month, it was 120. And she had her cycle back. She had a
That's a fast change.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's very significant. I have people call me after 10 days, like, oh my God, I have my brain back. I had a young woman with seizures who had over 50 a day, needed lots of sleep, wasn't able to drive, so forth. And again, the ketogenic diet with the depleted water. Within a period of 3 months, her seizures dropped down to 5. And the final seizures she was able to address with different types of therapies. And she's seizure free at this point. So really significant changes in these severe metabolic problems that there's really generally no answer for in medicine. So that's a good example.
Damn, well done. Yeah, that's awesome.
It's hard to prove the absence of disease, but once you solve it, then that's proven.
Yeah, life is hard if you're not functional.
Yeah,
really hard. So what brought you to Deutenomics? And I'm actually more asking of your spirit behind doing this.
Okay,
if I'm on it.
That's a good question. So I have been always a bit of a truth seeker, and when I became a parent 24 years ago, I started questioning why we do what we do in medicine and what the reasons were, why I wasn't being told about certain easy solutions that could have been used and so forth. And I started studying. And then I thought, okay, this is so interesting. I want to do this for the rest of my life, but what direction do I go in? So I chose at that point a naturopathic education. And I came to it late in life. I went to school at age 44 to begin with, and really, really, it resonated with me to try to solve the issues in non-toxic, natural ways. But you need to understand how the body works. So
yes.
I love that. But then in 2018, a big shock happened when my mom was diagnosed with colon cancer. And that just kind of changed. Again, I need to go back to the drawing board. What am I missing? Something had to be there that could change what's happening. And that got me into Deutenomics, into deuterium research, and I found out about that. And then I didn't stop. I've never stopped since, and I still do it every day. I learn constantly, and there's new little aha moments that I have. And it has become just so clear that everything we know in medicine has to be reassessed based on this information, because it changes everything. And, we need to go back to published data and revise it, reinterpret it, and understand where we went wrong, how we can make conclusions now based on knowing this information. And this is huge. It's huge. So, eventually we'll move to the point where this becomes really the mainstay of medicine. And from there on, you can address all of the physiological, biochemical, biophysics of health in other ways. But this has to be part of the conversation in any single condition, always. So yeah, we're very strong about that. So yeah, that's how I got here. I'm persistent. Yeah, and I want to do the right thing, and I want to understand it, and I want to provide solutions. Really, that's it.
Yeah, solutions are everything.
Yeah. So yeah, there we go. Another day. Yep, and I'm glad I could share some of this information with you, and hopefully you can share it with others, because it's really important that the word gets out.
Yeah, it works.
Yes, you know that.
Yes, I know.
Yeah, it works.
Yeah, I think this is a good place to end.
Perfect.
So do you have any, I will link all the studies and every article you sent me and mentioned down below.
Yeah.
So for everybody who's listening, look down.
Yeah.
And is there any places online that people can find more of you, websites, social media?
Yeah, I don't really do social media, but I have my website where I try to keep it up. And yes, I'll send you the link.
Awesome. That would be down below too. And thank you so much for coming on. This